Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? I want to be sensitive to everybody's time. And I certainly appreciate, given all the things that are going on in our lives, you taking time to be with us this afternoon. These are certainly unsettling times. But, when you step back, they really offer some rare opportunities to work on the neglected parts of our business. So before we get into it, I want to just provide some housekeeping rules before we get started. So we've reserved a little bit of time after the initial 30 minutes to answer some questions if we don't get time to get them in the first 30. Mark has agreed to stick around, and we'll do our level best to get to all those questions. Use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to post those questions as they occur to you, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that function. Before I get started, what I'd like to do is launch a short poll, won't take but 30 seconds, just to get a sense of who's here, what the audience looks like. So I'm going to launch that, and once I'm done, I'll share the results with everybody. Go ahead and take 30 seconds, if you would, and just review and answer those quick questions. Thank you. Okay, it looks like everybody's weighed in. Let's take a look at what the results look like. Good number of you have seasoned businesses with either fewer than 25 employees or over 100 employees. So good sized businesses. And looks like the majority of you online have founded your businesses, with a few exceptions having gotten into the next generation. So good. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. So some of you already know me. I'm your host, John Foster. And while some of you know me, for those who don't, I'm the managing partner of Pathfinder Group. And our firm works primarily with family-owned businesses to help ensure their version of the American dream, whatever that is. And for many of us, one of the principal drivers of that dream is growing our businesses with some form of exit in mind. That might be a sale to an unrelated third party, could be an internal transfer to the next generation, or to a partner. But in all these cases, there are serious tax implications to consider. And failing to consider those implications could leave you with a lot less money than you expected post-event. My guest today, Mark Sherwin, is somebody who we call the answer man when it comes to minimizing the impact of taxes on your business and your estate. So Mark is the president and CEO of Sage Capital and specializes in working with business owners and entrepreneurs, providing advanced tax reduction strategy. In short, he works hard to help preserve, protect, and pass on what you guys have worked hard to earn in terms of wealth. In addition to his practice, he teaches continuing ed on these tax advantages strategies to CPAs and attorneys who are practicing in Florida. I said earlier that Mark has agreed to stick around to answer questions, but following this webinar, but we'll also send you some links to documents that'll reinforce some of the topics that we touch on today and give you some reading material just to get up to speed on it. So here's what we're going to cover broadly. We're going to talk about buy-sell agreements. We're going to talk about transitioning a business to the next generation. And we're going to talk about transitioning a business to a third party. It really is about applying these tax strategies to maintain your family's wealth, enhance your retirement income, and to offer some other estate tax benefits. So let's get started with buy-sell agreements. Mark, we all know that business owners should have a buy-sell agreement. Tell us what's so important about having a formal one.
Well, John, a large portion of a business owner's financial future is probably dependent upon, or at least a large portion of it will be dependent upon selling the business at some future point in time. That's whether it's to a business partner, family member, or a third party. So a business transition plan that includes a buy-sell agreement with the co-owners outlining the terms of that sale is integral.
What are some of the trigger events that we find people experiencing that really brings the importance of this buy-sell agreement into clear focus?
Yeah, well, the buy-sell agreement will spell out a lot of the conditions of that future sale. So, for instance, triggering events for that would be, death and disability of one of the partners or the co-owners. It could also be retirement or maybe even termination. It could also be bankruptcy, and something that a lot of people don't even think about. It would be divorce. All of those are major factors that will have a significant impact on the business. Some other considerations are, who is going to be purchasing this? Is it going to be, is it going to be the business? Is it going to be the current partners? Is it going to be a family member, the next generation, or is it going to be a third party? Another consideration is, how are we going to figure out the valuation of this company in the future? It'll probably be some sort of formula. And then lastly, and well, not lastly, but another major consideration is, who is going to be purchasing it, and how is that going to be paid? Okay, especially if it's a family member, the next generation. Okay, how are they going to come up with the funds to purchase this this entity?
Other than those 3 points, those 3 features, are there other things to consider that you'd recommend?
Well, selling a business when you're getting close to retirement or at any time, taxes are always a major consideration. So tax minimization strategies are something to look at. There are other factors such as making the business as strong financially as possible, increasing and improving the credit worthiness of it, and once again being sure that the future purchaser is going to have the funds to be able to pick up this entity.
A lot of people think in terms of selling to a third party. It's somewhat natural, but there's a significant number of business owners who are more interested in passing the business on to their children, at least those that have children who are interested. Are there different planning approaches to the buy-sell when you're considering that particular scenario?
Yeah, there are. A consideration in passing this to the family is, okay, should I consider gifting a portion or all of the business interests to the next generation? Also, you need to be thinking about, okay, we've got, a couple of the children or the next generation that are active in the business, but what about the children who are not active in the business? So leaving gifting or transferring the business to only the heirs that are involved can cause conflict, and vice versa. So it's all about estate equalization as well to minimize conflict in the family.
I'm somewhat familiar with gifting, and over the years I know the rules regarding gifting had changed, but how does that provide a benefit to the business owner if they're planning on passing the business to their children?
Well, in passing the business to the children, whether it's from a sale or from gifting, you're essentially getting that business interest out of the estate. So the future appreciation of that business will not be included in the estate. And there are numerous ways that that can be done. We've got the annual gift exclusions here of $15,000 per individual. So a married couple can get $30,000 a year to each of the heirs or the children. But many times a business is going to be worth substantially more than that, depending on, you know, the age and the time to be able to make those transfers. So another consideration in gifting could be utilizing the lifetime transfer tax exemption, which right now is 11.58. So 11.58. So you can get about up to $23 million worth of the business interest out of your estate. And that is each individual spouse is able to give that 11.58. So that's how we came up with close to that 23 million or that 30,000. They can all be used in combination. So in reality, yes, this is similar to an estate freeze, but for that portion of the business interest that was gifted or transferred. So then that, once again, that future appreciation is excluded from the estate.
You know, I'm dating myself with this next question, but in the 70s, I was involved in estate planning. Now, I did say right up front that the rules have changed since I've been close to this, but there was something called in contemplation of death that enabled the government to claw back any of the benefits that you created if you created them within 2 years of your death. Kind of, you know, created an incentive to do your planning sooner rather than later. Does that caveat still exist today?
That is really more on when people are looking to transfer dollars out of their estate before they're going into long-term care and things along those lines. So it's not a factor in this planning.
Great. So we talked about children that are interested in the business. Many business owners have children who are not interested in the business. You know, what can we do for the kids who are not interested in the business, but who we want to continue having some benefit from the lifestyle that's been created as a result of the business in the first place?
Yeah, well, getting back to minimizing conflict in the family, for the children that are not active in the business, the family might utilize other funds to gift that the family may have for that estate equalization. At the same time, the business is typically a very, very large portion of that family's assets, total assets. So strategies to go ahead and do that, it could be in part this horrible word called life insurance. That would be one way where the benefit can be spread to the entire family for the estate equalization for pennies on the dollar. And there are other ways that the business owners can come up with dollars to help to supplement all of these, this transfer in the estate equalization.
So let's talk about that. What are some of the ways? I mean, this has to be funded. These instruments need to be funded. You know, what are some of the different ways that you see owners going about doing this?
Well, a business can use cash on hand. An issue with that, though, is that many times there's not going to be enough cash on hand to fund a buyout. A business could also have a sinking fund, which would be like a savings account. One of the considerations there would be, you know, what if there was an emergency, okay, or what if there was even an opportunity? They want to make sure that those funds are going to be there. So if the owners of the company, once again, if something happened, like a recent event just happened here in the United States and around the world, funds might be depleted, but also, like I said, an opportunity. Maybe the business, the controlling interest in the business sees that there is a fantastic opportunity somewhere, but so the resources are utilized for that. But perhaps there is one of those trigger events, and so they want to make sure that the funds are there. One of the things that they can do is keep the business so that it is credit worthy, and that's one of the stronger ways to help.
So cash on hand or a sinking fund in anticipation of the need are great ideas, but as you pointed out, when the time comes and we need the cash, very often the amount of cash that we need is not there for whatever the reasons might be. How often do you see borrowing come into play as a way to fund these needs?
Yeah, borrowing is often used. That could be from a bank or lender, or even from the actual seller. So some issues to consider if you want to be utilizing dollars from a bank or a lender is for a buyout. Many times, if one of those triggering events has happened, for instance, one of the business partner, whether he's retiring or has passed on or is disabled, many times the business, the lenders will not be as enthusiastic in lending those dollars. As a backup plan, many times an installment purchase can be utilized when the seller essentially sets up an installment plan with the purchaser. For the sellers of the business, that can be dangerous. Essentially, they had a business that they were building, and then if they are selling it to a third party, they are then dependent still on that same business where they no longer have control, and perhaps a large portion of their income or future net worth is tied up in that business. So what would happen if the new owners ran that business into the ground? It would be very, very difficult for the seller then to receive that original selling price. It would more than likely end up in litigation. Typically, the business is what would be backing a note that would be utilized for the installment sale.
So certainly that option carries some risk. What about life insurance?
Well, life insurance could be utilized for lifetime buyouts. So, for instance, let's say a child could be funding a life insurance policy. We're not talking about term here because we're not looking at death being a trigger event, but retirement for a lifetime buyout. So they could take tax-free loans or withdrawals from the cash value of their life insurance policy to help. It may not be enough to fully make the purchase, but that could be an excellent part of it, along with other funds that may be available to that child, to that heir, to purchase the entity from the parents or the senior members of the family.
So we talked a little bit about gifting as a tool, as a strategy for reducing one's taxable estate in general, in particular, gifting portions of the business to move the business in the direction of children that might want it. What other strategies could I use if I wanted to transfer my business interest to my children other than gifting?
Well, many times an installment sale is going to be used because, once again, perhaps the children haven't had enough time to get all the funds together to make that purchase. So that's when an installment sale can be used once again. But hopefully the family is in good communication and all that, so they're working together. What would happen is very similar to a third party. There would be dollars from the children going into a trust with a note in the trust going to the senior members of the family or the parents, where they would make installment payments over a number of years, make it 10 or 20 years. And so on a multi-million-dollar sale, there would be whether it's 100 or 200 or $300,000 a year going to the parents from the children, a benefit there would be that that the senior members of the family would only be paying tax on the dollars that were received annually. So they would be spreading out and deferring the tax on that installment sale.
What is that called, that trust?
Many times it's called an intentionally defective grantor trust. And it doesn't mean that it's broken or anything. It just means that the IRS does not count the transfer. Actually, what happens is the senior members place the business interest inside of that trust. Excuse me. Then the children put the installment payments into the trust. The trust then pays the senior members that amount. The senior members pay the tax only on the dollars that they receive from the note and from the installment payments. So they once again have spread out the actual capital gains over a number of years, and they've also enabled their children to purchase the company, maintaining family wealth, because they may not have had the opportunity to have accumulated the funds to make the full purchase.
So essentially, we set up the trust, transfer the business to the trust, and it effectively caps or freezes the valuation of the business. And at such time that the children would take over, a note to the trust paid by the children could fund the buyout to the parents.
Yes.
That explains the use of that trust for children. Can you effectively use that trust or a similar trust to gain some benefits if we sell to a third party that's not related to the family?
It would be a different type of trust, but that's where an installment payment to a third party would make more sense. Okay, so for instance, if the third party actually did have the ability to pay cash or to borrow from a bank or a lender, what would happen is that the seller would place the business interest into a trust, very, very similar to what they did with the intentionally defective grantor trust. We can call this a deferred sales trust. Essentially, they're putting the business interest in. The full sales price of the purchase of the business is put into the trust. So then the seller does not have a lot of those concerns, about the future payments to them, because the full amount of the purchase is in the trust. They have a note with the trust so that they are receiving, once again, the installment payments annually. They are paying tax annually on that amount that they're spreading out over 10 years or 20 years, or they could just be taking interest with a future balloon payment. But what this really allows them to do is to have deferred the tax on that full amount of the purchase price. And within that trust, they're able to actually invest that money the way that they want, whether it is stocks, bonds, ETFs. It could also be commercial real estate. It could also be highly appreciated a residential property. It could be other businesses. It could be collectibles. There's most asset classes you're able to make investments in, and most asset classes you're able to utilize this trust for that sale to defer, not just a business.
So I want to come back to that, but before I do, I just want to get something clear in my head. If we place the assets into the trust and we're selling to a third party, and the third party has all the cash necessary, then we don't have any of the risks that we talked about earlier for an installment sale: collateral risk, prepayment risk, foreclosure, or diversification risk, right?
Exactly. And once again, on the diversification risk, just like if there were an installment sale without having all the assets, they would be dependent on that same business that they had no longer had control of. Now, when all of the dollars from the purchase are placed into a trust, they are then allowed to diversify among those various asset classes that I mentioned, which are, there are some limitations, but you can pretty much do almost what you want. Like I said, stocks, bonds. You can purchase other real estate, commercial real estate, and many other asset classes. So they do have that diversification. If the business is run into the ground by the third-party purchasers, they still have their money, so they don't have that concern, and they're able to, if they're closer to retirement, they are able to set up the funds to produce more income or whatever their family goals happen to be.
What's the mechanism for? Well, let me restate that. We talked about putting the assets in the trust, effectively freezing the value of the business. Ultimately, maybe the business sells for an amount above that, but you've deferred that gain. Now, as a seller, I start receiving payments. Not all of those payments, though, are gains. I mean, there's a return of the initial basis, and then there's excess over that basis. How do you approach, or how is the allocation of what is a taxable portion of that payment approached?
Yeah, it's basically like it would have been whether you're using this trust or not. There's cost basis, there's recapture, depreciation recapture. So all that will be factored into the amount of capital gain that is the proportion of that installment payment that's made typically annually.
That's a pretty powerful tool. Great strategy. I'm going to ask you about the similarities between it and a 1031 exchange, but what other benefits are there for holding the proceeds of a sale in the trust?
Well, the main thing is, since we're talking about deferring the capital gains tax over the installment period and only owing tax when we receive those annual payments, that means that we have essentially almost the full amount of the actual sale. We then are able to invest all of those dollars in those various types of asset classes that I mentioned earlier. So we haven't paid the 20% perhaps capital gains tax. We haven't paid the 3.8% Obama tax. If it's a property or business outside of Florida or another a highly taxed state such as New York or California, those dollars we're able to work with all those dollars so that we're also earning future interest, or at least our goal is to earn future dollars off of that money that otherwise would have gone to the government.
So if let me go back to the 1031 exchange comment I made earlier, because if I understood you correctly, this can be a complement to or an alternative to the 1031 tax deferred exchange for commercial real estate. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, you are. It's very similar. There are differences. With a 1031, there are many limitations and restrictions and time frames that have to be dealt with. A deferred sales trust is much more flexible. So, for instance, a 1031, you have 45 days to identify the property you want, and you have 180 days to actually close on a property. So with that, many times people are rushed, and maybe they're not able to purchase the piece of property they want, because it's also, aside from the time frame, it's a like investment. So maybe they don't maybe they haven't found the exact piece of property that they want, but because of a time frame, they're just going to go ahead and do it. Also, many times these fall apart, whether it's for financing or the multitude of reasons. So a deferred sales trust can be used as an alternative to a 1031. You're accomplishing much of the same thing that a 1031, but with other benefits, because you're not restricted to make a like purchase, being real estate. Okay, so you could purchase real estate, but you're not required to. So you could also invest more for income, or whatever your goals were. You can make those choices and have that flexibility. So it is an alternative to a 1031, but it can also be a rescue for a 1031. So as that clock keeps on ticking, getting closer and closer to that 180 days, these trusts can be set up relatively quickly to go ahead and rescue that 1031. And once again, then what has happened is that the investor can wait until they found the right piece of property that they want. But then once again, they can diversify among many asset classes if that's their preference.
Well, I want to be sensitive to our time. We've just crossed the top of the hour. There's a lot of details behind some of the concepts that you've shared. If I wanted to learn more about this and more, what are some of the next steps I might take?
Yeah, well, in thinking about that, I would think, what would I want? And what I would want is to review some information on this and then have a confidential conversation. So I would be able to read up and get some information, and then be able to set up a confidential conversation where we talk about your stuff and what you want, and then decide what's next, if anything.
I will, I think I shared with everybody that we're going to be sending some information after this, so that you who are interested in looking more deeply can check out some of what Mark is doing. Let me see, I've got a couple of questions here. Yeah, so you provided some great information. What's to stop somebody from just taking this information and giving it to their lawyer and say, paper it up?
There are some intricate parts of this particular trust that where there is much more flexibility than is typically out there. At the same time, legal documents are legal documents, and they could have that opportunity.
We've certainly experienced what I'm about to say now in the last couple of months. History has shown us that timing the market is very, very difficult, nay, impossible. If I was getting ready to sell my business in June or July, and I was thinking about that in January, of course, valuations have been completely crushed. And even the methodologies to value a business have been changed somewhat. In your view, what's a reasonable lead time that I, as a business owner, should be thinking about when I'm planning this exit or transition from my business?
Well, for business transition, I would say years. To have your business in the proper form. And John, you this is right up your alley as well. Having all these pieces and all these considerations and having had them set for years is the very, very best way. At the same time, once the decision has been made, we are able to implement this strategy quickly, very quickly. So this isn't something for this particular strategy with the Divert Sales Trust that we need to be planning. Let me say that better. If you decide that you want to use this for the sale of your business or highly appreciated asset, we can get those assets into a trust to defer the tax relatively quickly.
Great. Well, I thank you, Mark, for your time and and the information that you've shared. I want to thank everybody who's been on the call. Just to remind you, we'll follow up with some information that's specific to what Mark had to say. And if you've got some interest, please reach out to him and he'll be happy to talk to you about your own situation, because this is a highly personal and customized solution that we're talking about. And if any of you have questions about accelerating the growth of your company and trying to position it for a maximum value when you decide to transition, call us here at Pathfinder Group. We'd be happy to chat with you. Once again, thank you very much. Stay safe. And Hal, if you're still on the call, and Bill, you'll know our buddy Chip says this all the time. Stay strong, everybody. Stay strong.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks a lot, everybody.
All right.